citizen. Reporting tonight, Ayotunde Balogun.
Hello and welcome. Tonight, the Chief of Defense Staff says the hoisting of foreign flags amounts to treason. General Christopher Musa warns that the Nigerian military will not accept anyone pushing or calling for a change of government. Protesters in Kaduna, Katsina and Zamfara states take to the streets for the fifth consecutive day, flying Russian flags as they demand an end to bad governance and improvements in the standard of living in the country. And over 600 suspected looters are prosecuted in a mobile court presided over by magistrate judges in Kano State.
In our business, NNPC Limited launches Utapate crude oil blend as the company expands Nigeria's market presence.
On sports news tonight, Nigeria's Favour Philly runs a season best of 22.05 seconds in the women's 200 meters semi-final, becoming the first Nigerian woman to qualify for the finals in 28 years.
From Abuja, the nation's capital, the Federal High Court sitting in Lagos declares the sale of Nigeria Air Limited to Ethiopian Airlines null and void.
And in international news from London, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has resigned and fled the country after anti-government protests in which hundreds of people have been killed.
The Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, is sending out a warning to people carrying foreign flags in Nigeria to cease from such an act, describing it as a treasonable offense, and those caught will be prosecuted. He was speaking in the State House after a security meeting with President Bola Tinubu in company of the other service chiefs and heads of security agencies. The defense chief also dismissed insinuations of a coup in the country with a reminder that all security agencies will continue to stand and defend democracy.
2 hours meeting with Mr. President, we explained to him in details the current situation on ground since the riots have started. And what we realized is that, yes, initially people said it was a peaceful riot, but we have warned against it because we realize that there are individuals that are willing to take advantage of it to cause mayhem, and we can see clearly what has happened since it has commenced. Criminals have taken over, a lot of looting, a lot of stealing and all sorts happening. And besides that, we're also aware that all of us have seen it, where some foreign flags have been flown within the sovereignty of Nigeria, and that is totally unacceptable. We are warning in clear terms, and the President has also said we should convey this, that we will not accept anybody, any individual flying any foreign flag in Nigeria. That is a treasonable offense, and it will be viewed and treated as such. So nobody should allow himself to be used by any individual. Also, the issue of coups. Nigeria is a sovereign nation. Nigeria is a democratic nation. All security agencies are here to defend democracy and ensure that democracy continues to strive. We will not accept anyone pushing or taking any action, seemingly or for whatever reason, to want to push for any change of government. Democracy is what we stand for. Democracy is what we continue to defend. The military is going to step in when it is out of bounds. And we can see that for people, subversive elements to push individuals to carry Russian flags in Nigeria, Nigerian sovereignty, that is crossing the line, and we will not accept that. And those ones who have done that will go in for the books, and they're going to be prosecuted.
Indeed, protesters in Kaduna, Katsina and Zamfara states took to the streets for the fifth consecutive day, flying Russian flags as they demand an end to bad governance and improvements in the standard of living in the country. However, the protests, which turned violent in Kaduna State with reports of looting and destruction of government and private businesses, necessitated the state government to impose a 24-hour curfew in order to restore order.
The End Bad Governance protests in Kaduna took a different dimension on the fifth day. The protesters hit the streets with the Russian flag. The protest later turned violent as public and private offices are looted by the protesters. It got to the point they attempted to hijack an armored personnel carrier. Unable to access it, they climbed all over, even as the driver tried to shake them off. The state government eventually declared a 24-hour curfew to stem the violence. In a statement signed by the overseeing commissioner for the Ministry of Internal Security and Home Affairs, Mr. Samuel Arwan, the government says the measure was taken in the interest of peace. There were also scenes of protesters flying the Russian flag in neighboring Katsina state. The protesters, mostly young people, started from the family home of late President Umaru Yar'Adua and marched through Kofa Street down to the defunct Yar'Kutungu market. In Gusau, the Zamfara state capital, some protesters regrouped carrying Russian flag. The protesters are mostly children and youths who march across major points in the state capital, including Tudunwada, Freedom Square, the Government House, and Garabiu. Despite the 24-hour curfew in Plateau State, miscreants in Dilimi area clashed with security. However, normalcy was restored following the reinforcement by security agencies. Meanwhile, Governor Morufin Tiri of Adamawa State has described the demand of the End-Bad Governors protesters as genuine. In the statewide broadcast, the government states that there are macroeconomic policy issues that can best be addressed by the federal government.
Good governance is your right, and that is what we have all sworn to give you. That is what is our trademark in Adamawa State. As a government, we don't really need to protest we don't need to protest to remind us of this sacred responsibility. We are doing our best to cushion the effect of your hardship. We are particularly conscious of the disturbing youth bulge with a growing unemployment rate that is alarming.
Governor Fintri commended the people for hearkening to the government's call for calm as the state has been peaceful, assuring that his administration will ensure that their demands receive attention.
The Nigeria police have arrested one Ahmed Taylor, who is alleged to be responsible for the mass production of Russian flags in the Kwana Hudu area of Nasarawa local government area in Kano State. Addressing a news conference organized by the Strategic Communication Interagency Policy Committee, the Force Public Relations Officer, Mr. Olumuyiwa Adejobi, says 30 persons have been equally arrested in Kaduna for flying the Russian flags.
It's the quarterly media interaction of the Strategic Communication Interagency Police Committee, a forum of spokespersons of security agencies in the country, coordinated by the Office of the National Security Advisor.
The past weeks have been characterized by notable threats of protests.
The spokesperson of the Department of State Services starts with an update on the arrests made during the End Bad Governance protests.
In the lead-up to these protests, the Nigerian intelligence and security agencies uncovered plans by subversive groups and vandals to hijack the process. I have not got briefs about any arrest. Maybe after the conference, if there is any information about any arrest that I can confirm, I will definitely get to you.
Persons responsible for the production and flying of Russian flags in Nigeria under the guise of the protest are also in the police custody.
Just this morning, we have arrested one Ahmed Taylor from Kwana Hudu, a Nasarawa local government area of Kano State, for producing in large quantity Russian flags given to young Nigerians to go and fly.
The police also provided explanations for the heavy presence of security at the Moshood Abiola National Stadium, the approved location for the protest in Abuja.
Our presence is not to harass anybody, not to intimidate anybody, but for us to protect our national assets.
The military appeals to the protesters to embrace dialogue, vowing to ensure the restoration of normalcy.
We will will continue to be a stability force as we seek to bring stability in any area of our country where it is needed. And we will continue to be committed to guarantee the safety of our citizens across the country, and will continue to do so.
As the protests continue in various parts of the country, security agencies are urging Nigerians to ventilate their grievances peacefully.
Meanwhile, the Russian government has denied any involvement in the use of its flag by some protesters in some parts of northern Nigeria. The denial was contained in a statement by the Russian embassy posted on its website. The embassy denied any involvement in the use of its flag by the protesters nor the chants for President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Now, the embassy adds that none of its officials is involved or coordinating such activities, describing it as the personal choices of the individuals involved in the incident. The state adds that Russia maintains a principle of non-interference in Nigeria's internal affairs and expressed respect for Nigeria's democracy. Suspected sponsors of protesters flying the Russian flags have been arrested as the Kano state government expresses fear of having foreign influence. Meanwhile, over 600 suspected looters are being prosecuted in a mobile court. Our correspondent Sadiq Ilyasu reports.
It's the fifth day of the bad governance protest in Kano State. The protest, though peaceful, has taken a different dimension with protesters flying a Russian flag.
Here in Kano State, northwest Nigeria, you can see behind me, protesters have continued to protest despite the warnings by the police. And the shocking thing is the fact that they are carrying a Russian flag. Some of them said that they are doing this in order to piss off the federal government.
Some of the protesters lamented the economic hardship they are facing in the country and explained their decision to fly the Russian flag.
I have 3 children and I'm a laborer. What I earn now cannot feed my family.
To ai su sun san dalili. Ai ba sai mun faɗi dalili ba. Sun fi kowa sanin dalilin da yasa muke daga tutar Rasha. Kuma ba bayani da zamu su sun sani. Su za su boda da muke so a bude.
To bring back fuel subsidy, ensure security, but unfortunately the president did not address this nicely.
The state government distances itself from the protesters carrying the Russian flag.
Going about with the flags of any other country has no business with the Kano state government, and we are not aware of anybody who has the right to do that.
However, over 600 suspects accused of looting and other offenses have been charged before a mobile court.
And as for the number, I'm sure there are over 600 that have been apprehended. Now, the charges include theft, unlawful assembly, criminal conspiracy, mischief by fire.
The state government has announced the arrest of alleged sponsors of the protesters with the Russian flag and raised concerns that the protests may be having foreign influence.
And the DSS have also been able to arrest the person or one person who was distributing those flags to those unsuspecting young boys and girls. It's not really something that you can just easily have a position. And if it has a foreign connection, it's even beyond now the state government, because this is now for the federal government to deal with.
The situation remains tense and authorities are closely monitoring the development as the curfew remains in place. Sadiq Ilyasu, Channels Television News.
In part 2 after the break, the Federal High Court sitting in Lagos declares the sale of Nigerian Air Limited to Ethiopian Airlines null and void. Please stay with us. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. The Chief of Defense Staff says the hoisting of foreign flags amounts to treason. General Christopher Musa warns that the Nigerian military will not accept anyone pushing or calling for a change of government. Protesters in Kaduna, Katsina and Zamfara states take to the streets for the 5th consecutive day, flying Russian flags as they demand an end to bad governance and improvements in the standard of living in the country. And over 600 suspected looters are prosecuted in a mobile court presided over by magistrate judges in Kano State. Heavy security presence dominated major streets of the Federal Capital Territory on the 5th day of the End Bad Governance protest. Some of the roads were cordoned off as motorists were redirected by the authorities to use alternative routes. Our correspondent, Dele Omoyeni, reports.
The MKO Abiola Stadium is the only place the End Bad Governance protesters are allowed to assemble following a court order. However, at about 11 a.m. on Monday, some protesters who arrived at the stadium in buses were dispersed. The protesters are concerned over the use of excessive force.
Day 2, we gathered again at MKO Abiola Stadium. The same government of Bola Ahmed Tinubu that went to court to get a court order to restrict our activity to MKO Abiola Stadium. The same government of Bola Ahmed Tinubu also brought talks to meet us the same venue where they have gotten court order to restrain our activity, to limit activity. They still brought us to the same venue to come and unleash talks on us. This morning again, they have also brought talks to come and unleash violence on us, and unfortunately for them, their own very police now fire tear gas at the talks that the government brought to come and unleash mayhem on innocent and peaceful protesters.
Meanwhile, normalcy has returned to Karu, a suburb on the border between Abuja and Nasarawa states. Earlier in the day, some protesters gathered in the community but were quickly dispersed by security agencies.
In the morning around 7, I just come out. I saw some people came from Nasarawa with tires, starting burning tire in this our junction, Karu Junction Mosque. Immediately, by the time I saw them, I quickly called the depot of Karu. Before 10 minutes, the depot of Karu arrived, and then we started to stop the people. By the time we finished them, some people just run away to this Yanya.
As you can see, most of those shops are closed. It's due to the protests. A lot really happened in the morning. They are burning tires and even fighting the police due to the protests. That is why you see some soldiers hanging around the area. They are even trying to burn some house here today, but due to the soldiers, they try to block some issue like that. So that's why the soldiers are surrounding us to protect the environment.
For now, all the major roads leading to the Eagle Square and the Federal Secretariat are sealed off by security agencies to prevent any breakdown of law and order. Dele Omoyeni, Channels Television News.
In Rivers State, a crowd of protesters blocked the Port Harcourt refinery junction as the End Bad Governance protest enters the 5th day. Now, our correspondent, Deborah Agbalama, who is following the events of the protest from Port Harcourt, reports.
Regardless of the nationwide presidential speech broadcast of Sunday calling on the youth demonstrating against an end to bad governance to end their protests, these protesters in Port Harcourt, the Rivers State capital, are not pacified at all. The crowd on day 5 of the nationwide protest is much more than that of day 3 and 4, and even had to split into 2 at some point. One section headed straight to the NNPCL refinery Eleme and obstructed vehicular movement for hours. According to them, the president did not address their demands, which include the right to control the natural resources in the state and the provision of jobs, among others.
We had the Mr. President's speech yesterday. It was not encouraging at all. It doesn't even go with the line of our demand.
Rice bag is 90,000 naira. We couldn't even afford one square meal in a day.
A second set of protesters stayed within the Port Harcourt metropolis and at some point was almost infiltrated by some area boys who destroyed the traffic control cubicle at JDB Roundabout, Odili Road, Port Harcourt. However, the presence of security operatives put things under control, preventing them from disrupting the peaceful protest procession.
All we are asking for is for him to meet our demands. Tinubu meet our demands. Tinubu meet our demands.
As they marched through the streets, the protesters create traffic jam as motorists had to use green leaves to signify solidarity with them. They say the protest continues until their demands are met by the government. Deborah Abalama, Channels Television News.
In Lagos, protesters returned to Ojota to continue their protest against what they describe as government's anti-people policies. The protesters, which include members of the Campaign for the Defense of Human Rights, gathered outside the Gani Farimi Park and expressed their grievances as they vowed to continue until their demands are met.
Protesters regroup at Ojota in continuation of the nationwide demonstration put together by the Take It Back movement. Just as the protesters are busy with their demonstration, security agencies are also on the ground and in the air to provide surveillance. The demonstrators are out 24 hours after President Bola Tinubu's nationwide broadcast calling for the suspension of the protests.
I hereby enjoin protesters and the organizers to suspend any further protest and create room for dialogue.
These protesters are not impressed with Mr. President's broadcast, as they say it did not address the federal government's anti-people policies.
What we're interested in are actions on those demands that we have said. Where price hike should be reversed, you don't need a dialogue to do that. In any case, the reversal of fuel subsidy was not done through a dialogue. It's not done through a meeting. Somebody just went to Eagle Square after he was sworn in and declared it, even without setting up a cabinet.
The protesters are also calling on the president to sack the Inspector General of Police over the alleged killing of some demonstrators across Nigeria.
The Congress is demanding the immediate dismissal of the Inspector General of Police and all of those who have perpetrated these killings against our people.
The most important thing inside the list that we are demanding for as protesters is that he brings down the price of fuel. Because if you bring down the price of fuel, every other thing will drastically crash.
As the End Bad Governance protest continues in Lagos, it is hoped that the protesters will agree to meet and dialogue with the government in order to address the root cause of the demonstrations.
So let's now head to the nation's capital, and Gloria Umezoke is standing by to give us the very latest from Abuja studios. Over to you, Gloria.
Many thanks, Ayo. The Federal High Court sitting in Lagos has declared null and void the sale of Nigeria Air Limited to Ethiopian Airlines. The presiding judge, Justice Ambrose Lewis Alagoa, in his judgment stopping the sale, ordered that the proposed establishment of a national carrier, Nigeria Air, by the federal government should not be carried out. The judge made the order while granting the reliefs sought by the plaintiffs, the registered trustees of the airline operators of Nigeria, and 5 others in the aviation industry.
The court had said today, and quite rightly too, that the process of the privatization was faulty and that it should not stand. So, meaning that the entire process of the privatization process entered into by the federal government as represented by Air Nigeria and the then Minister of Aviation, Senator Hadi Sirika, is null and void and of no effect. and it's assumed that nothing happened in that respect, and so everything has come back to the normal position where it was before. So the privatization never took place. It has no effect. Whatever that was done there was a nullity and of no effect.
Now, the first plaintiff happens to be the registered trustees of the airline operators in Nigeria. That is our own client. Now, that is the first plaintiff on the matter. So the intervenors came in, who are the two registered trustees. There are 5 registered trustees. We represented the 2 of them who came to say there was no time they agreed to institute this action to challenge what the plaintiff has come to court to challenge. We must always bow to the decision of the court, but we still have other opportunities.
Still ahead on the news at 10, NNPC Limited launches Utapate crude oil blend as the company expands Nigeria's market presence. And that's some business news. Please join us again. Welcome back. You're still watching the news at 10, coming to you live on Channels Television. In reaction to the agitation for political office appointees to be placed on minimum wage to reduce the cost of governance, the Minister of State for Steel, Mr. Uba Amadu, says he is willing to work for free in service of the nation in as much as it is what the people want. He was speaking on our breakfast program, The Morning Brief.
It's a wonderful opportunity to serve the nation, and like I always say, speaking for myself, I can do this for free, and I'm sure it's the same with virtually all of my colleagues. No one there requires or has the need to rely on the salary of. By the way, how much is it? I don't want to talk too much on that. These are things that are in the public domain. You can access the salaries of ministers with the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission. By the way, it is nothing to write home about. Not like we are not, like I said, we are grateful for the opportunity. Being chosen out of 250 Nigerians, we are like 50 now, given the opportunity to serve the country. I told you that is just enough.
The minister also promised that the Ajaokuta steel plant in Kogi State will be up within the next month or 2.
Ajaokuta is not moribund, like it's often put out there. This same government has engaged professionals, like AFDB, UNIDO, to look at it, and they have reported back to the president. In the not distant future, maybe a month or 2, you should be able to see something. I want to employ journalists like you, very responsible journalists like you, to once in a while go out and check out these things.
The presidential candidate of Labour Party in the 2023 election, Mr. Peter Obi, has criticized President Bola Tinubu's nationwide broadcast on Sunday, August the 4th, in which he asked the protesters to leave the streets. According to the former governor of Anambra State, the president's broadcast failed to address the demands that fueled the nationwide protests. In his words, and I quote, "While the president's speech focused on the past, the people are concerned with the present and the future," end of quote. He adds that President Tinubu should have started by addressing the pressing issues such as the exorbitant cost of governance, measures to tackle corruption, the high cost of living, and directing resources effectively towards critical areas like health, education, as well as poverty alleviation. Reactions continue to trail President Bola Tinubu's nationwide broadcast on Sunday, August the 4th, following the End Bad Governance protests across the country. The Executive Director of Patriot for Advancement of Peace and Social Development, Mr. Sani Shinkafi, explains that the president's broadcast did not address the issues of the protesters. He was speaking on Channels Television's morning show, Sunrise Daily.
There must be a hunger in the land when there is no security, and that is what also generates to the food insecurity in Nigeria. And if you look at what is happening now in the country, we have people has unlimited wants, and the resources are limited. So the limited resources mismatch with the unlimited ones. And that is what generated to the also low cost of living, the devaluation of Nigerian currency, forests, corruption in the oil sector. If the government is saying on the presidential speech, he said he made mention of the reforms and also the achievement of his administration for the first 14 months. But there should be economic recovery plans and economic growth. And when you are going to apply these economic recovery plans and economic growth, there should be a short term, medium term, and long term. Some of the economic growth that Mr. President is saying, he highlighted in his speech, a long term, but we need a short term economic recovery plan.
However, another guest on the show, Professor Oke Okechukwu, who is the Executive Director of Development Specs Academy, believes the President addressed some of the issues raised by the protesters. He, however, advises the protesters to adopt a more constructive and collaborative approach to drive sustainable solutions.
Let's contextualize the entire protest and the protesting community. In the last 10-15 years, the locus of public protests have changed. 80s, 90s, the 2000s, you had people who were known to drive public protests. Adams Oshiomhole, Femi Falana, Sheikh Hussaini, and the rest of it. So there were people who, once they got into the public domain, you knew there were issues. If you have the outlook of a generation that expects that type of protest leading, you will never be able to cope with this type of protest. You will notice that most of the leaders, you have to ask questions before you find out who they are. And you find that many of them are self-propelling. I mean, the individuals coming out are angry. With that in view, you now look at the president's address. The protesters must look for strategic engagement through dialectical pragmatism. What do I mean by that? He has said he wants to dialogue, isn't it? Dialogue with him. Sir, you told us there's going to be dialogue you on your own without telling him. You choose among yourselves because all of you from the stadium, from Ojota cannot come to dialogue with anybody. Each of those groups and select their leaders. Okay, let's select 20 of us from across all the platforms. Let's meet among ourselves and tabulate the things we want and see if we can edit it to what is possible. Restructure all of it as the voice of one group, which is the protesting Nigerian youth. Present it to him. Short term, do this. Long term, do this. Medium term, do this. But you also then look at the feasibility of some of the demands.
So that's it from the nation's capital. For more on the news at 10, it's back to you, Ayo, in Lagos.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Back in Kaduna State, the police command has arrested 39 suspects in connection with inciting violence, displaying of Russian and Chinese flags, as well as vandalizing public and private property in various parts of the state capital. According to the spokesman of the Kaduna State Police Command, ASP Mansir Hassan, the suspects who exploited the End Bad Governance in Nigeria protest used it to unleash violence against innocent people. Among the suspects include the tailor who produced both the Russian and indeed the Chinese flags for the protesters. Time now for some business news with Will Ibong.
Banking so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Thank you, Ayotunde, and welcome to Business News. Now, NNPC Limited has launched a new crude oil grade, the Utapate crude oil blend, into the international market. This blend is extracted from oil mining lease OML 13, located offshore Akwa Ibom State in Nigeria and operated by NNPC subsidiary NEPL. This new addition, similar to the Nembe crude oil grade launched last year, has a low carbon footprint in line with the specifications required by major European buyers. Currently, Utapate crude oil production stands at 28,000 barrels per day, with plans to increase to 50,000 barrels per day, and the blend has a low sulfur content of 0.0655%. The first cargo heading to Spain marks a significant milestone for Nigeria's oil industry. Employers Consultative Association NECA is urging protesters to embrace dialogue while also requesting the government to urgently address the seeming economic contradictions. The Director General and Chief Executive of the association, Mr. Adewale Smart Oyerinde, commends President Bola Tinubu's for addressing the nation on the protest, but believes that some interventions should be prioritized among others, and these include issuing strict directives to regulatory agencies to prioritize regulation over penalties, suspension of the sugar tax for food and beverage, as well as sustaining the supply of crude oil to the Dangote refinery as directed by the president to reduce the nation's propensity to import fuel. Now, the Odua Investment Company Limited has inaugurated its Lagos Liaison Office as part of a strategic effort to accelerate growth and expand its footprint. The building, which is a 62-year-old structure built by the former Western Nigerian Corporation, will henceforth, according to the chairman of the company, Otumba Bimbo Ashiru, become a meeting point for all organization subsidiaries. Mr. Ashiru says the opening of the new Lagos Liaison Office would act as a communication bridge between the holding company and the investment community. Now, the domestic equities market kicks off the second full trading week in August with negative sentiments as major giants like MTN Nigeria record lowest price action in 3 years following the global stock market crash. Ladi Williams tells us more.
Hello and welcome to the Stock Market Report. Well, the first full trading week of August, and it's the protest trade with the bears dominating the local bonds 0.17%, flipping the intraday gain of about the same margin there and closing in the red. 55 trillion, that's the market cap. Let's look at the sectoral performance. We see even gains with the big banks couldn't save the market. Today was 0.19% gain for the banking counter, with most of the big banks up today. Then we see the consumer goods counter almost 1% gain, oil and gas marginally down. Then we see the market mover for today, MTN Nigeria, share price shedding about 5.95%. That's the lowest level in 3 years, and that's what's dragged the market down to 178 naira for the MTN share price. So for the month of July, the local bonds was down about 2% for the month, and with major sell-offs with global bosses, I guess most markets couldn't avoid the bears today.
Thank you, Ladi. Like you say, major global stock markets fell sharply at the start of the new trading week. We're seeing that amid global stock sell-off. And with Japan, Nikkei's logging the worst day since 1987 Black Monday crash. Let's check out the closing numbers. That's it on business. It's back to you, Ayotunde.
Banking so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Many thanks, Will. Here's Simon Pusey with our international news and around the world in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the channel's studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has resigned and fled the country after anti-government protests in which hundreds of people have been killed. Here, footage of thousands of protesters storming Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's official residence, Gana Baban, shouting slogans, pumping fists and showing victory signs. Elsewhere, jubilant crowds took to the streets in Bangladesh. Some 300 people have been killed over the past month as authorities have cracked down on anti-government protesters. Demonstrators had in recent weeks been pushing the Prime Minister to quit after over 2 decades in power. Here, demonstrators in Dhaka attacking the statue of Sheikh Hasina's father. Earlier, Bangladesh's army chief made a televised address to the nation saying an interim government would soon be formed.
They will feel that they have won today because a lot of people have lost their lives in this fight, which really began peacefully only over quotas and government jobs, but escalated because of mishandling by the government, by the absolute arrogance of the political leadership, by excesses of the security forces, into something which was so angry and demanded that Prime Minister stepped down.
Meanwhile, here in the UK, Sir Keir Starmer has announced a standing army of specialist police officers to tackle violent protests in UK towns and cities. The Prime Minister said criminal justice will be ramped up following an emergency response meeting with ministers and police chiefs. Police say they are working tirelessly to identify people who took part in the disorder, with South Yorkshire Police warning, "If you were there, we will find you." A hotel housing asylum seekers was targeted near Rotherham on Sunday, with violence unfolding in Middlesbrough, Liverpool, Belfast and elsewhere. The protests follow a stabbing attack in Southport last week, in which 3 children attending a dance class were killed.
There have already been hundreds of arrests. Some have appeared in court this morning. I've asked for early consideration of the earliest naming and identification of those involved in the process, who will feel the full force of the law.
European stock markets have sunk dramatically following nosedives in Asia as fears rise that the US economy is slowing down. In London, the FTSE 100 index fell by 2.8%, while in Paris, the CAC 40 dropped by 2.5%, and Frankfurt's DAX slid by 3.2%. Earlier, Asian markets plummeted, with Japan's Nikkei 225 down 12.4%, or 4,451 points, in the biggest fall by points in history. It comes as weak jobs data in the US on Friday sparked concerns about the world's largest economy. Iran will definitely take serious and deterrent action against Israel, the foreign ministry spokesperson has said, following the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last week. Tehran and Iran-aligned groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah have accused Israel of killing Haniyeh in the Iranian capital. His death was one of a series of killings of senior Hamas figures as the war in Gaza between Hamas and Israel nears its 11th month. Israeli officials have not yet claimed responsibility. Hurricane Debbie has made landfall as a Category 1 storm in the Big Bend region of Florida's Gulf Coast and begun a slow crawl across the state, causing potentially dangerous storm surges and catastrophic flooding. The hurricane came ashore in Florida about 70 miles southeast of Tallahassee, packing maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour. The Hurricane Center forecast life-threatening conditions, including storm surges up to 10 feet in some areas. The storm could bring potentially historic rainfall of between 10 and 20 inches and catastrophic flooding to Georgia and South Carolina. And Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet has inaugurated the construction of a controversial Chinese-funded canal that will connect the Mekong River basin to the coast. The project that would potentially cut shipping through Vietnamese ports by 70%. The $1.7 billion project, funded by China Road and Bridge Corporation, a major Chinese state-owned construction company, is expected to be completed by 2028. Conservationists and Vietnamese authorities have voiced alarm at potential damage to the already fragile Mekong Delta, a massive rice-producing region supporting millions of people downstream in Vietnam. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the channel's studios in Lagos.
Thanks, Simon, and welcome to Sports News. Nigeria's favour Ofili puts behind the disappointment of not competing in the women's 100 meters event as she secured her spot in Tuesday's women's 200 meters final at the Paris Olympic Games. Ofili this evening finished second with a season best of 22.05 seconds, just behind Julian Alfred, who won the race, crossing the line in a time of 21.98 seconds. She is now the first Nigerian woman to qualify for the finals of the 200 meters at the Olympics in 28 years since Mary Yali won bronze out of Atlanta 1996. And staying with the Summer Games, we have more exciting updates on other sporting events on day 10.
Italian gymnast Alice D'Amato emerges as the surprise champion on the balance beam today after favourite Simone Biles fell off the 10-centimetre wide apparatus during the final to finish out of the medals. With a clean routine devoid of any major errors, D'Amato earned 14.366 points, enough to win her gold. South Korea's An Se-young consolidated her status as a top player in women's badminton by winning the Olympic title, beating China's He Bingyao 2-0 in the final in Paris. Germany wins gold in the mixed triathlon relay, narrowly edging out the United States in second place and Britain in third in a thrilling end to the race through central Paris.
And the Olympics does it for us here on Sports News. Thanks for watching. I'm Kelly. It's back to Ayotunde.
Thank you, Kelly. And the main news again. The Chief of Defense Staff said the hoisting of foreign flags amounts to treason. General Christopher Musa warned that the Nigerian military will not accept anyone pushing or calling for a change of government. That's the news at 10 tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ayotunde. Have a good night and please stay safe.